Good evening, The Hague. Thank you for coming to this literary and historical evening at the Public Library in The Hague. The evening is part of the Writers Unlimited series. As you've noticed, the language will be in English, because that's our common language, I guess. Well, Laksmi understands Dutch, so be careful.
Well, passively.
So a special welcome to Laksmi Pamuntjak from Jakarta and Hilde Janssen from Utrecht, the two guests of tonight, and they are here to talk about their new books. In the meantime, I'll clean my spectacles so I can see. So they are here to talk about their new books. Laksmi Pamuntjak's The Question of Red, translated in Dutch. It's been presented last Saturday at the Read My World Festival in Amsterdam as Amba of de kleur van rood, which is a slightly better translation than the one you did yourself.
Well,
in English.
I think
because Amba is...
No, I think it has something to do with just having the best of both worlds, because the Indonesian version, the original version, is called Amba, whereas the English version is The Question of Red, so the Dutch tries to incorporate everything.
Yeah. So, exactly.
It's a nice compromise.
So that's a very Dutch solution. And Hilde Janssen's enkele reis, I'll show them to you. This is Hilde Janssen's book, Enkele reis Indonesië, 4 Amsterdamse vrouwen in hun nieuwe vaderland, which was published in July, so it's out for a couple of months now, but it's certainly it's burning on our tables. It's worth talking about. So what we will try to do tonight is to strike a conversation about the two books. It will be at first a conversation between us three, and later you can get involved. We talk about the two books, about Indonesia, of course, maybe about women. We'll see where the evening leads us and where our thoughts lead us. We have had a wonderful dinner. We talked about a lot of things, so we can go in any direction our minds go. And we surely want to talk about the violence in Indonesia, all kinds of violence, but especially that of 1965, the one that we kind of commemorate these days because it's 50 years ago. I propose that we will proceed in the following manner. First, I will talk with each author individually, so that you get to know her a little bit better. Try to get a picture of the books and of the authors, and afterwards we will have this conversation on all kinds of topics from the books. And these books seem to be very different, and it's nice. It was a nice idea of Writers Unlimited to connect them. It's a bit of a challenge, but I'm sure we will succeed in doing this, to connect these books. Laksmi Pamuntjak's book is a very rich novel about one woman and a few other women, and a lot of men, of course. This woman and her love for independence and her inability to escape fate. Maybe that's the shortest summary I can give of your book.
Try as she might, yes.
Yes. And the other is a collective biography of 4 Indonesian women from Dutch stock, which makes it, of course, very special. So import brides, as it were. So still, I think the themes of the books are very closely related, as both take a long-term view of Indonesia. They cover the last 60 years of Indonesian history, maybe a little bit more. They're both about strong-willed women, and about violence, about identity, and about this ominous year, 1965. So let's start with Laksmi, if I may call you this. Laksmi, you were known for several much praised books of poetry. They were much applauded. You're known for your food journalism, I must confess that was the first thing I encountered from you. I read your Good Food Guide of Jakarta many times. Okay. I lived your book, actually, when I was in Jakarta for a long time. And you own a wonderful bookstore, cultural center in southern Jakarta. You're a graduate of Murdoch University. You did political sciences
and Asian studies.
And Asian studies, very successfully. I read. So in Australia, you lived for some time in Singapore. So you're a kind of cosmopolitan figure, and you devote your time now to literature. And now, especially now, your debut novel "Amba" received such critical acclaim, and even being a sort of hype in Germany, isn't it? It was received with a lot of applause and acclaim. So I would love to discuss food with you, but there's an even more serious. Food is a very serious business, and I love it that you take it so seriously, especially in a place like Indonesia and Jakarta. But we have other serious business to do. So you know what we'll do? Let's read a fragment from your novel, so we get in the midst of things. Okay. Please.
Okay, I'll start with something sort of pretty much slap bang in the middle, and then I'll go back to explaining where it is in the plot. But this comes. The book is divided into 7 chapters. 7 books, actually, and by books I mean big chapters in which there are smaller chapters, and this is chapter 5 in book 2, and it's called "Your Face Holds the Sadness of a City," and I'll read just a fragment of it. On the 6th of October 1965, the night before Amba planned to return to Yogyakarta, she suddenly developed a case of acute shyness. The thought of being with Bisma both excited and scared her. And it isn't entirely an unlovely thing, she thought, to understand this kind of vulnerability in oneself. Early that morning, there had been a fresh burst of activity in the hospital, green berets jostling with angry people bearing arms. The head of the hospital was away attending to family matters, and the hospital felt like a sinking ship. Half of the staff disappeared by 3 p.m., and the hospital buzzed with news of Banser troops attacking the Communist Party headquarters in Banjaran. According to reports, a late morning rally on the city square had moved en masse to Banjaran, where a fight broke out. There were casualties, Communist Party members ran for their lives, and their headquarters were burned down. In the afternoon, when Amba went to the warung on the front yard to buy a bar of soap, she saw a throng huddled near an old radio, faces uniformly grim, as though being as close as possible to the instrument of news gave them comfort in knowing what was going on. Perhaps they thought the radio would help them plan their moves and be better prepared. Amba could hear only parts of what they were listening to. President Soekarno had called all ministers to attend a cabinet meeting at the Bogor Palace, the first he'd convened since the outbreak of the 30th of September movement. But folks didn't seem assuaged. They were full of rage over the death of General Nasution's 5-year-old daughter, hit by bullets meant for her father on the morning of the 1st of October. After 5 days of fighting for her life, her tiny body finally succumbed. The nation was incensed. They wanted someone to pay. The word Gestapo, an acronym for the renegade movement, clearly meant to sound like Gestapo, and its variant Gestock were on everybody's tongue, in everybody's breath, leaving angry emulsions on the wall. But nothing ignited hatred more than the acronym for the Indonesian Communist Party, PKI. As the warung keeper handed Amba her soap, he hissed that he wanted to kill his fucking communist PKI neighbor and his entire fucking communist family. There was a crazy look in his eyes. And now she was alone in the office on a night like this, and Bisma was nowhere to be seen. Had he forgotten this, that this was her last night in the hospital, their last night together? She heard a gathering noise. It took her a while to realize there was a storm bearing down upon the city. Like an interstellar production of socialist propaganda, she thought, as if the heavens had decided to get in on the act, and people had somehow become superfluous. Soon the earth seemed to be retaliating, refusing to be subdued in the theater of rage. She could hear it in the mad swaying of trees, in the deep groan of the building she was in the creaking and cracking of everything around her. It felt as if the entire planet had decided to buttress her indignation, even though she had no choice but to remain quiet. She might not be the proper Javanese girl of her mother's heart, but histrionics were not in her genes. The clock on the wall said 10 to 9. A hunk of iron pressed on her chest. She was buttressed behind a desk she would never see again in a town she had barely seen outside the hospital walls, her legs heavier than lead. She wanted Bisma with her. She was dying to ask him where they were headed now after what he'd done. But she would have to admit their affair was not all his doing, or his doing only, for her body was her own, and it decided things for her. She wanted to say, but that's it, you see, that's what you've done. It is as if you are, and therefore I am. She remembered telling Bisma that great events never took time to bow before her or to pause for her benefit. She wanted to tell him, now I was saying the truth, I meant it. That is what my life was all about. But now my old life has died, so I have nothing to console myself with. So answer me, where are we headed, you and I? But there were no answers. The night was getting on, and she still had no clue where her lover was. Was he still tending so late to patients? Was he smoking in some private inviolate place he kept from her so that he might wallow in his memories of Leipzig and the more sophisticated world that was once his? Had he gone out to Banjaran, perhaps, to help victims of the recent clash, forgetting that this was their last night together? Was he nearby, in another woman's room, a woman whose beautiful belly glistened with his semen? When did she become this jealous person?
Thank you very much. Where are we in the novel? It's you said it's a bit midway, but there's. Well, I'm sure we cannot do justice to the novel. It's such a multi-layered story. But basically, we see Amba ensconced, as it were, in Kediri, in Eastern Java, in a hospital where she meets this fabulous surgeon.
Yes.
It's
this fine specimen of a man. That is, yeah.
And what went before is that she's betrothed to
Salwa, and therein lies the faithfulness to the epic. Mahabharata, but I mean, I'm just going to give you the bare bones of the novel. Please. And well, the story in essence is a love story, and Amba and Bisma are star-crossed lovers. They come from very different backgrounds. Amba is a tough-minded, emancipated woman from rural Java, and we were talking about the 40s, and she was born in 1944. And she studied English literature in Yogyakarta, in central Java. And Bisma is from a privileged elite family in Jakarta, and an East German trained doctor who is working in a small hospital in Kediri. So they meet in Kediri, fall in love, and are separated in the chaos of the days that followed the killings of the army generals on the 1st of October 1965, which was then blamed on the Communist Party, of course, and set off a chain of violence and retaliation across Java and Bali. Now, 40 years later, Amba learned that Bisma might or might not have died in Buru Island, where he was carted off in 1971, along with approximately 12,000 alleged communists, without due process, without trial, and elected to stay there after the prison camp was dismantled in 1979. Now, accompanied by Bisma's best friend Zulfikar, who was also incarcerated in Buru, Amba sets off to Buru to find out the truth. And in her voyage meets a stranger called Samuel, with secrets of his own, who aids her in her journey. So that's really, you know, the bare bones of the story.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. That's where the novel starts. It starts with this search for Bisma, for his body. She heard that he died, and she travels to Buru to find him after 40 years of separation, because they were separated by the clashes, by the violence that erupted in the wake of the 1965 coup, so-called coup in Jakarta, and then the army violence that happened in the rest of Indonesia. So that separated those two, and after 40 years, she starts looking again for him. Amba is a very, so this is a very superficial storyline. We cannot do justice to it. Now, this person, Amba, is of course very central to the book, and her character is extremely complicated, I think. When you read the book, she's making turns that is sometimes hard to follow, and you did that probably very consciously. But it's hard to understand why she does things. Was it your intention to make her such a complicated figure?
Well, that's what all women are like, you know. I mean, you know, they never act the way you kind of expect them to. But anyway, no, I mean, there is a point to be made about fiction. That it's at some point it does take a life of its own, and it drives sort of characters in so many, it multiplies characters in so many directions that at some point that you can't control them, try as you might. But Amba, I mean, I've always, you know, the thing about Amba is that of course she is a person, she's a figure of history, somebody I needed to imagine, even though she might have traits that are timeless, that are, you know, are universal and are, you know, probably true of all of us today, beholden as well as emancipated from certain things that, you know, that do define our lives as well. But she was born in 1944. She had a very specific, you know, sets of societal norms and kinship and family structures that govern her life, which means that even if she is very willful, if she's very ambitious and she's very tough-minded, it was somehow made possible also by the support of her father, who comes from an Abangan background. I'm just a syncretic, like I'm a Muslim, but of a rather sort of a syncretic bent, who had made it possible for her to reach her dreams. And in her life journey, I could have made her completely and utterly independent. She met Bisma, and they had an illegitimate child. She then carried, she found out that she carried Bisma's child in her belly when they were just at the moment that they were separated. And I could have made her much more independent in a kind of a feminist tradition, that she didn't have to rely on a man to survive and to give meaning and dignity to her life, as well as her daughters. But because she had dumped, basically, her betrothed, Salwa, who was a very, very upstanding man, but whom she's completely bored with, for the love of Bisma. So she feels that she needs to make amends, for certain transgressions that she's made, for heaping shame upon her family. And that is, I think it's a very, very natural thing that we are still, finding in today's world, where, women could be as emancipated as possible, but there is such a thing as duty to family, love of family, and they don't want to heap shame on them. And then also, there are lots of inconsistency in her so-called independence. When Bisma and Amba were riven apart in an event that actually took place in history, and I use as a basis of reconstruction the story of a source of one of my sources, and they were separated in a university during a crackdown. She decided not to look for Bisma anymore after a period of time, because she.
Yes, why? She's carrying his child.
Because because at the time there was a pinprick of time which was very telling of her complicatedness. She felt that she might have been the second best. She saw a beautiful woman at this gathering, and she started imagining that Bisma might have been more attracted to her, because Bisma is so much more worldly and much more sophisticated than her, and so this is a kind of internalized.
So it's the jealousy that you talked about in your.
She lacked self-confidence, basically. She lacked self-confidence, but at the same time she was proud enough to not be the second best, and so she'd rather, she concocted in her imagination that maybe Bisma disappeared from her life deliberately to be with this woman. It's a completely irrational instinct, but it happens to the best of us, right? And so, so she decided to not to look after herself.
Yeah. There's a third element here. We hear the dutiful Amba, who wants to be a dutiful daughter. But there's the independent Amba, who wants to study English, who postpones her marriage to this very boring and very ideal son-in-law, Salwa, who doesn't show any lust for her. He doesn't show desire, and that she's very much upset or bored by it. Would he have kissed her, etc., embraced her? That he doesn't do that. So she's bored, and so she takes the independent step. But on the other hand, there's the dutiful Amba. But there's the third one, and that's the one of the Amba of fate.
That's right.
Of providence.
That's right.
And I think that adds to the complication. It's not only her jealousy, it's not only the struggle between, maybe I am reading it into your novel, but you wrote it, so it has become my novel too. And there is this element of fate, because Amba is a figure from the great Indian epic Mahabharata. You told us. And Bisma, not coincidentally, is of course the other.
It's a conscious decision. It's a conscious decision for me to use the Mahabharata, the great Hindu epic, as the framework for my novel, for many reasons. I just need to backtrack a bit. But the overriding importance of using the Mahabharata as a framework is because, in all the great epics, ambiguities, doubts, vacillations, and inconsistencies are very, very much part of the human condition, and it teaches us not to look at life in sort of a black and white manner. And it's very, very important for talking about 1965 because, I mean, my generation has been taught a very one-sided version of history where, you know, it's a battle of good, and pure evil, black and white, here or there, and you need a different narrative. So there's that, and Amba and Bisma. The story of Amba and Bisma is a very small part, actually, of this great epic. But I've always been drawn to the sort of the more marginalized, the cast-off characters, not the major characters of the epics that everybody knows. And what draws me to the specific case of Amba is that she, through the epics, has become the symbol of the fallen woman, of you know, a woman twice scorned, because she was betrothed first to Salwa, the King Salwa, but then she was abducted by the warrior Bisma to be wedded to another king, and which then made, you know, which then got her betrothed to reject her on the grounds of impurity. Mm-hmm. And when she begged for Bisma, her abductor, to save her honor, he also rejected her on the grounds that he had vowed celibacy. And he was a man of honor. He was a man of, you know, duty came first. So she's the first monstrous feminine, basically. And the Indonesian version, as well as the Indian version of the epic, always depicts her as someone who is vindictive, as somebody who will wreak, you know, havoc into the life of Bisma and exact revenge by incarnation into Sri Kandi. So of course I have to completely rewrite this entire thing because I want somebody who is named Amba, which is not which is not possible actually in Indonesia, because nobody would dare call their daughters Amba. Because of this association, but I was playing with the possibility that it's possible for somebody who is called Amba and who actually who tries to subvert her own name or her own fate, and to live by her own lights.
So it's about a woman twice rejected, mm-hmm. by Salwa and then by Bisma. The nice thing is
Well, which is why then she met another person, and rewrote her own history, her own fate.
Exactly.
In a way.
Mm-hmm. That's nice because you don't make your novel a modern version of the Mahabharata. You're playing with it. She's not really rejected by Bisma. They are separated.
And this is what I mean.
Misunderstanding. Yeah. So she runs away. Actually, she goes to Jakarta, or she meets another man, a German American, Adalhard, mm-hmm. And they marry. And again, she finds herself with a dutiful man, but not the hero, Bisma, she is longing for. Would Indonesians immediately recognize, when they read Amba and Bisma, would they immediately recognize Mahabharata? Would they know the parallel story?
I'd like to think yes, but sadly I think no, because people. There is this general perception that the Mahabharata is our national myth. It actually isn't, but the Javanese, and I am half Javanese because my mother is from Central Java, and she has exposed me to stories of the wayang, the great tradition.
Your father is from West
and he's
Sumatra,
he's from West Sumatra, and so it's a completely different world, it's a completely different mindscape, completely. But but I have been extremely privileged to have been exposed to stories of Mahabharata ever since I was young, and so I was lapping up all these, cartoons, and there's an amazing tradition of cartoons and comics. Yes. Of the Mahabharata. I was growing up in the 70s and 80s in Jakarta. I was consuming it like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
and in the old days, Wayang, of course, the Wayang stories. Well, the Wayang performances.
But yes, and I was.
But that's maybe the older generation.
Yeah, but exactly. But maybe I was an exception to the rule. I would be dragged to Wayang Orang performances, for instance, by my mother, but I don't know anybody else who did that. So maybe I was kind of an exception. But yeah, I mean, I didn't choose the Mahabharata for its familiarity. I didn't assume familiarity from my fellow Indonesians, but it is easy enough to get into because it is not so unfamiliar.
No, and you do explain it in your book. I first thought it was for foreign consumption, but now I hear
in the Indonesian version there is no prologue. You see, because I wanted to exercise my prerogative to think that all my Indonesian readers need to know it.
Okay. But it's in the
they need to at least do some research on it if they're interested in it.
It's in the Dutch translation.
It is.
Your explanation of the Mahabharata.
And in the German translation as well as in the English translation.
Well, now there's even a second epic story involved, but we won't go into that. But you like the play with epic, with the old stories. This Centini, which is a much younger, early 19th century Javanese collection of stories about the Mataram kingdom. So you like the play with the epic stories and the parallels. So that makes it a very rich book. Do you think you are working in a literary tradition? Do you feel you started? This is your first novel. There's just recently, last year, your second novel has been published, Aruna dan Lidahnya. But when you started working on this novel, and you've been working on it for 6 years, 7 years?
No, almost 10 years. But I published 6 or 7 other books in between. So it wasn't necessarily an idle period, but I almost needed everything else to happen to aid me in the slow absorption of the material, because the scale and the magnitude of 1965 in particular is so staggering that I needed the time.
So do you feel you're working in a literary tradition? In an Indonesian literary tradition, where can we find you? I had all kinds of reminders, reminiscences of other authors, of course.
Well, for instance, Seno Gumira Ajidharma, who was just who was just at the featured at the Read My World Festival, deals a lot with mythology, and he transposes it onto a modern setting, for instance. And so this is not definitely not a novelty. My contemporaries, Leila Hudori, Ayu Utami, lots of people actually use elements of mythology to to tell their story. Danarto. So no, I think I'm.
Yes, but in this mix of realism and the supernatural, maybe. I was also reminded of somebody like Y.B. Mangunwijaya.
Romo Mangun.
Yeah. Who wrote, maybe it's known to you, het boek van de wevervogel, Boem Boem Manjar. A wonderful book about also this ambiguous story of loyalty and politics.
But I think this is. I mean, this goes back to you just mentioning Serat Centini and me playing with all these old stories. I think I on one level on another level, actually, wanted very much to paint or to bring out an older civilization before Islam became louder, you know, in Java in particular. I wanted to sort of go back to the roots of our syncretism, to the roots of our to why we have become, all in all things considered, a more sort of moderate and a more tolerant and a more syncretic Muslim population, because we have all of these great traditions living inside us, and that holds true. Yeah. I think for the use of all these old, you know, myths and the old literary traditions, and weaving it into our very modern stories, or modern storytelling, put it that way. Mm.
Okay, thank you very much for this moment. We'll come back to you. Maybe we talk a little bit about Hilde's book, Enkele Reis Indonesië. But the protagonist of Laksmi's novel is this slightly mercurial but very strong-willed woman. But the book of Hilde has 4 of them. Yes, there's. But let me introduce you first. You are an anthropologist by training and a journalist by profession.
Yeah.
You moved to Indonesia. You lived in Asia for quite a while. You lived in, I didn't keep track of it, but you lived in Indonesia for some time. You went to India
for 20
and returned.
Years. Yeah. So I first moved to Indonesia, then '93 I moved to India, and after the fall of Suharto in 2000 I moved back to Indonesia.
Yeah, yeah. And you worked for journals and other media, Parool, Algemeen Dagblad, if I remember well, others maybe. You are, of course, known best for your book Schaamte en Onschuld, het verdrongen oorlogsverleden van troostmeisjes in Indonesië. So about the comfort women, sex slaves, that's a better term. So the women, the Indonesian women and the few Dutch who were used by the Japanese as sex workers for the army. And this was a project you did with the well-known photographer Jan Banning, with beautiful portraits of these now very old women. And then you suddenly, I think just before you returned to Holland, you stumbled upon these 4 women. How did that go? What happened?
Well, it was just after we had our exhibition on comfort women in Indonesia at the Erasmus House, and it was the 65th anniversary of the Republic of Indonesia, so there were lots of exhibitions going on, and we were invited to other exhibitions, and one of them was to commemorate the independence struggle. And it was composed of photographs of IPOS, which was actually the first Indonesian press photograph service. And in that exhibition, I was fascinated by one picture, which is on top of my book, on the cover of my book. And it was, by composition, a very beautiful picture, because you felt the tensions of people looking somewhere in different directions, and on the other hand, there was a kind of tension, but they were also, one of the women is leaning on the shoulder of an Indonesian young person, and it's an intimacy that you would not expect, especially after reading the byline saying Dutch women on the way to the Republic 1947. So then I thought, my God, these women, 47? What are they going to do there? And do they know what they're up to? Because...
I guess that's what most of the Dutch people in Indonesia at that time were thinking.
Yeah, because what they told me afterwards was that probably this photograph was taken when they were crossing the border, literally the border between the Dutch occupied area and the Indonesian occupied area, or the Republic area. And people were doing this, meaning, you're crazy, gila. What are you going to do? Because they were used that all the Dutch would flee to the Dutch side, and from there on would proceed to the Netherlands, because they had enough of war and they wanted to look for a safe haven. So, yeah. A lot of people were thinking that.
And that was the moment you saw this photograph, you thought, this will be my book?
No. I thought, this is the picture I'm looking for, this one I'm going to take home as a kind of farewell for myself. So I decided to buy a print, and once that took a while before I got my print. And when I got it and I looked at it again, then only I thought, well, maybe these women are still alive. You know, I should give it a try and ask them myself, because I had so many questions about what they had done. And so that's when I decided that I would search for them and see if I could find them.
And you did?
I did.
So how did you find them? How can you find... you didn't know their names?
No, I didn't know anything about them.
The only
Actually,
thing is
only I
that
had
they crossed the
picture.
border in sometime late 1947.
That they arrived early 47. Yeah. So I remembered that some months before that, I visited a book launch, which actually was about 65, coincidence. And when I went there, I saw, in the audience, I saw a couple of Dutch women, obviously Dutch. And one of them was called forward and to the podium, and she got the first copy of the book. And she was called my Dutch Ibu Angkat. My Dutch, how do you say in English? I don't know.
Foster,
huh?
I don't know, foster mother?
Yeah, foster mother. Yeah, that's the good word. So I recall that one. And I thought, well, these ladies must have been about the same age. So maybe, since they're so old, maybe they know some stories, and maybe they know, can give me hints or tell me a story about those women who arrived in those days. Yeah. So from then on, it was actually easy, because I called the writer of the book, and she gave me a telephone number, and the person I called said, of course you can come over, and I look at a photograph. And then, to my surprise, she looked and she said, that's Minnie, that's Annie.
Yeah.
And then it was easy.
Because we see here two of the sisters. Yeah. This is Minnie, this is the youngest of the three sisters, and this is Annie, which is the middle one. And there's an older sister, Betsy, and their friend, whom
Dolly.
they met on the ship.
They knew her from Amsterdam.
Oh, yes.
From,
so we have three sisters from Amsterdam, without a Indonesian connection, without a colonial connection.
No. Also, the friend has no.
Three of them marrying Indonesians in Holland.
Wow.
Yeah.
And moving over to Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Why do you think all three of them? Of course, one started. I think it was
Minnie. According
Minnie?
to Annie, Minnie was the first. She was there.
The youngest was the first.
Yeah.
And then the rest had to follow. What was?
Not really to follow, but I think they were in an environment. They came from a socialist communist background, and their mother was a communist, at least. And she was active, she was an activist, and she kind of had connections with Indonesians. Somehow they all said, yeah, they came to our house, so somehow I think through the Communist Party she was helping them out, because a lot of Indonesians were coming to Amsterdam after the war also and had nowhere to go, especially people who were working on ships. And somehow, yeah, one fell in love, but they all came to their house, until even the mother said that twice a week, no more than twice a week you are allowed here, because all the boys were flogging in because of the three sisters.
So they plugged into a Indonesian circle in Amsterdam. The interesting thing is that those were not the intellectual circles about which we know. Of course, many Indonesian men studying in the Netherlands married Dutch girls.
Yeah.
Many of the nationalist leaders actually in Indonesia have or had Dutch wives. That's interesting. We forget about that. But those Indonesians were sailors.
Yeah.
They were laborers. They worked
were
in the
kind
harbor of Amsterdam.
Dragged into the war because many of them were working for Dutch shipping companies. And once the war started, and I think not that many people realized, but well, we are a navy nation, and because we had a colony in the east and colonies in the west, we had good ships, very fast ships, and they had renewed a lot of ships when the war started, so we had the best ships around. So the English, who were kind of the persons who were in charge of the Allied forces, they were able to annex those ships and ask them to be part of the war facilities. And the people who were on these ships, the Dutch sailors, but also the Indonesian sailors, or whether they would come from Suriname, they had to go along. And they became, in that sense, part of the war. Some were trained, some were just working on the ships. But they, well, one of this guy in the middle, he was at D-Day Normandia. He went to Sicily. Yeah. He got the Northern Star for bringing troops to Africa. So they were quite involved in the war. Yes, and after the war, they were kind of dropped and dismissed.
Yes, the men are not so prominent in your book,
no.
But your next book might be a nice topic.
But it's difficult to find information about those men.
No, I was intrigued. I was intrigued by a family who marries 3 of their daughters off to Indonesia. And I was, of course, love knows no borders. And probably no ethnicity, but I was imagining a family from Almere who was sending their daughters to 3 Syrian refugee...
but I think at that time, what it amazed me was at that time that at least many Dutch girls were attracted to Indonesians, but there was also a kind of... what I imagined from what I read about it and heard about it, there was an interchange. There was a cultural interchange, because there were each, even during the war, till I think the Germans stopped it, every 2 weeks there would be a matinee in what was then called the Colonial Institute, the museum nowadays, and it would be fully booked. It was really, people would look at wayang and performances, at Konchong music they would listen to. So there was a vibrant community of Dutch and Indonesians, at least in Amsterdam.
Yeah. You track down their life histories, their life stories, from the beginning to the end. Actually, well,
it's not their end yet. For most of them, one died.
One died, yes.
Still alive.
Exactly. So we follow Indonesian history through the lives of these women, and we see that their lives start to diverge. Especially the friend, so not the sister, but Dolly, the 4th one. She married a student in Holland, and he was a topographer, and he became big in the Indonesian army, and then you see that their lives start diverging.
But well, what happened in between was that Minnie divorced from her husband, and she married another Indonesian, and that was a person who was also, although he was not able to study a lot, he came from a family of nationalists and of more educated people, and who also made a career, because I was fascinated, because your book is about the struggle during 65 with the sugar industry. Well, he became big in the sugar industry, and he even became the boss of the nationalized sugar industry. So Minnie also kind of grew at the same level, or she reached the same career level as Dolly until 65, and then.
Yes, and yeah. Okay. The interesting thing is, when you start a book, you think you will read a book about the revolution, and the first chapters, the first half, is about the revolution and how these women make do in a revolutionary surrounding. And there's, of course, the second, is it the second military attack of the Dutch, and they're in the midst of it? No, it's
the first. The first in Malang, and then Dolly the second, and also in Solo.
Yes, exactly. But then the second half of the book, it's dominated by this 1965. And that was a surprising turn in your book. It was surprising to me, because it's 1965 hangs as a shadow over the second half of the book. And that's where those families start to... Well, they stay friends, but they don't discuss politics anymore. Dolly is, of course, very much part of the establishment, the military establishment. Minnie, her husband, is imprisoned. And there we are. So they're at the two ends of the spectrum. Maybe could you read a fragment, please?
I will.
Because I guess you had a fragment on this.
Yeah. I know I got a new, different page, but I'll read from this one. I think then they can follow up with the slides, because I read in Dutch, and it will be translated in English over there for those who don't speak Dutch. And this is in after 65. Minnie dept het zweet van haar gezicht en trekt haar haarband recht. Haar verdriet stopt ze weg, want dat maakt je kwetsbaar, breekbaar. Ze heeft haar les de afgelopen 2 jaar wel geleerd. Wachtend in de rij voor de gevangenis om haar man met een beetje geluk 10 minuten te mogen zien. Bewakers laten de bezoekers gewoon in de brandende zon staan om vervolgens met hun handen de meegebrachte etenswaren te inspecteren en dan expres een ei te laten vallen of een zak suiker kapot te scheuren. Soms wordt Minnie weer weggestuurd. Krijgt ze haar man wekenlang niet te zien, omdat hij uitgeleend is voor ondervraging. Het is een doorzichtig spelletje treiteren om te kleineren en te intimideren. En diegene die zichtbaar boos is, die gaat huilen of smeken, heeft verloren en wordt zo dubbel gestraft. Het land is verdeeld geraakt door de politieke gebeurtenissen in 1965. Je bent vriend of vijand, lotgenoot of handlanger. Oude vriendschappen raken bekneld in het keurslijf van de nieuwe orde van Suharto. Voor Minnie is het de wereld op zijn kop. De helden van de revolutie van weleer zijn nu landverraders. Gerespecteerde intellectuelen en bestuurders zijn gedegradeerd tot straatventers en bedjarijders. Ze weten hoe het voelt. Zelf is ze ook van de bovenste plank, van de bovenste laag naar beneden gedonderd. Het was een flinke klap. Vooral de eerste maanden tijdens haar zoektocht naar Nanang. Ze voelde het als een vernedering wanneer in de overheidsgebouwen voormalige collega's en strijdmakkers van haar man snel hun blik afwenden en hun assistent lieten melden dat ze te druk hadden om haar te ontvangen. Het doet er nog steeds pijn. Het ergste vindt Minnie dat ze de regie kwijt is over haar eigen bestaan. Ze is een regelaar die graag alles onder controle heeft. Nu moet ze zich voegen naar de grillen van het Suharto-regime en de individuele militairen en ambtenaren. Dat gevoel van afhankelijkheid in combinatie met de onzekerheid drijft haar soms tot wanhoop. Ze moet afwachten wanneer haar man zal worden. Ze moet maar afwachten wanneer haar man zal worden vrijgelaten. Toen Nanang werd opgepakt, wist ze eigenlijk al dat het lang zou gaan duren. Maar ze kon niet voorzien hoezeer haar leven op zijn kop gezet zou worden. Binnen een jaar moesten vanwege de krappe financiën het huis verkopen. Hun eerste eigen huis, een groot en stevig huis met zoveel herinneringen. En nu, een jaar later, heeft ze afscheid moeten nemen van 2 van haar kinderen. Ze mist Koes en Henny al op het moment dat ze het vliegtuig instappen. Ze troost zich met de gedachte dat het in het belang is van de kinderen. Dit keer had ze tenminste zelf de regie in handen. De autoriteiten wisten van niks. Zelfs voor haar kinderen was het een onaangename verrassing. Ze waren compleet overdonderd. Maar Koes en Henny beginnen nu aan hun toekomst. Ze verdienen een nieuwe kans, vindt Minnie. Ze heeft haar plan zorgvuldig uitgewerkt en voorbereid. In Nederland hebben ze meer mogelijkheden. Ze zijn nog jong en flexibel. Minnie was zelf ook 20, net als Koes toen zij naar Indonesië vertrok. Ondanks alle problemen heeft ze haar draai gevonden in haar nieuwe vaderland, samen met haar zussen. Nu is het aan Koes en Henny om in Nederland een nieuw bestaan op te bouwen.
Thank you very much. Yes, you show that although they are completely convinced that they should become Indonesians, and to a large extent they become Indonesians. Yeah. I think their behavior is very much Indonesian, if we can say so. They embrace their new country, but still there are those, and that's of course the immigrant's story. There are still those strings attached to the Netherlands, and in dire need, Minnie sends 2 of her children to Holland, of course. How do you, and maybe that's a question to both of you, how serious did you take history? I was struck, of course, yours is a work of fiction, with a very strong historical basis. Yours is I don't know what it is. It's a family history. How serious did you, Hilde? How serious did you take history? Did you check your facts, or did
as far as possible, yes.
Or did you reproduce family lore, in the sense of family stories?
No, I tried to check as far as possible, and some things were possible because, well, Dolly, for one, is a person who really collects everything. She archives everything, so she gave me maps full of letters from her family, so in which certain facts at least I could check. Of course, I could check that they traveled by the weltevreden to Indonesia, so there were news articles on the fact that they left the country. I found the manifest, the ship manifest, with the passengers list and a small diary by the captain of the ship. So, yes, I could check certain things, but certain things it was like logic. Yeah. Like you hear 10 stories and you think that, oh, if this is this and this is this, then this should be it. So that's the most logic thing.
There's a lot of invention in your book. Like a sentence, Dolly probeert zich in de keuken te concentreren op het opspuiten van een paar taarten. You write this in 2010 and we are talking 1965.
Yeah. So, no, there were of course things that Dolly at that time was indeed baking cakes, selling cakes. Yeah. And but if she was doing that at that specific time, I don't know. I know that what she told me what happened that day, but she said she was busy in the kitchen. But the cake thing I put in it, and that of course I do sometimes. I make what they say is what they have said, or what they told me, or what I read. Or
but I think that's a strong point of your book. As long as you don't read it as a literal, as a history, it is about family stories.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it is a truth, but it's not a factual truth. It's narrative.
Yeah, in that sense, yes. Because the strange thing was actually that I have met Minnie in 1988. And I knew she had come to Indonesia with 2 sisters. That is what she told me. I visited Nanang in his factory, where he had some ex-taboe working there. And so they gave me insights of the stories, but what I heard about their past was that Minnie and her 2 sisters had come to Indonesia as nurses, and that they were helping out the Dutch military. That they then somehow felt that it was not the right story, the right side, so that they shifted sides and that they joined or supported the Republicans. And when we talked about it later, together with Minnie and her son Koos, and Koos said, yeah, Mama, but that's, because then Koos admitted that that's the story I know. That's how I learned about the story, because I met Minnie via a friend and a friend of Koos. So probably that story had gone along. And then she said, no, but I was married already before I met Papa. So it was like, for her, it was no secret that she had been married before and that she left a married woman from the Netherlands. But somehow Koos had, because I don't know why, he also was like, I don't know, because they never talked about those things. So I just heard small bits and pieces, and I made my own history, my own family history. So, you come across the memory is not always trustworthy.
No, of course not. But that's an interesting part of the story, how memory works. And you see that as it comes to 1965, Dolly doesn't want to talk much about it because she feels that it's very sensitive history. Now, Laksmi, how did you go about with the historical parts of your novel? Did you do research?
Well, of course. I think in doing a historical, in creating a historical fiction out of something that is so, most of its parts are non-negotiable, right? You have to distinguish between hard facts and soft facts, the ones that you can rewrite with some license. So I was very, very much relying on oral testimonies of ex-political prisoners. I had 2
So you visited ex-taboe?
Yes,
as they are called, and
I mean, a lot of them are based in Jakarta. The two primary sources for my book, one is Amarzan Lubis, who's now a senior editor at the Tempo magazine, which is a national news, a liberal news magazine, and the other is actually the first son of the very, very famous painter Sujoyono, who is also featured in my book, and the irony of their situation is that Sujoyono himself was a card-carrying communist, but he was never incarcerated. He was never put in jail. Whereas his son, who was 17 at the time, he was scooped from Respublika University in Yogyakarta, which is also featured in my novel. He was just the wrong person at the wrong time, and he was suspected to be a communist, and he was carted off to Buru along with the 12,000 others. So these were my 2 main sources, and so they were. I mean, I relied very, very heavily on their testimony, but I also did. I also relied on the memoirs of a lot of political prisoners, not just the mute soliloquy by the great Pramuja Anantatur, but also of Hersi Setiawans, of Kresno Saroso, who is maybe not quite well known here, but his memoir was very, very rich, and it came from the perspective of someone who had a medical background, and because Bisma is a doctor, so I really had to sort of rely on his on Kresno Saroso's memoir to help me navigate about what was possible within the realities of Buru as a doctor. and then there were all the classic, works of the left, of course, and
because it's not easy to find
John
a
Rusa,
good,
by
sorry,
Robert Cribb, all these scholars, and also, of course, I did a lot of work, research on the internet as well. Like I stumbled upon this amazing document on the internet that describes in detail this Universitas Gajah Mada, Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta in the 50s, for instance. So and then I went to Buru
That's not easy
Island.
sometimes to find really stories or how do you say it, evidence or descriptions of how life actually was on the streets, what you saw,
Sure.
what people would eat, things
Of
like
course.
very ordinary things, because still people tend to, then you, I read
And,
a lot
yeah.
of memoirs also, and then
Exactly.
I thought, oh, no, they don't put anything.
But there-
No,
then
exactly. I
there's-
mean, this is the challenge, really, because you really had to, to be able to bring to life, a forgotten world, or a world that you did not actually directly experience yourself, and that was always the hardest part. It was also the hardest part, of course, in telling the story of people who had gone through so many atrocities. Same thing. Do you're mainly just appropriating and representing the lives of people who had gone through so much, and you probably, and there's a lot of responsibility that entailed this undertaking. That would you have enough in you to be able to represent it, to be able to encapsulate and to capture their pain. So it's hard. As it is hard to actually fill in all the sort of the details of daily life and atmosphere and all that. Just,
in that sense, I was helped because Minnie kept a kind of a diary. Only during the years that her husband was in prison, and she didn't write very often, but she had a kind of poem-like stories in Indonesian, and she would write about the things that she was very angry about, but she would also cut out photographs of a father with a son just showing the hands, or a cartoon about Suharto, or various different things. So you had a kind of...
And of course, it's never going to be just about, okay, so I want to find out about what life was like in Yogyakarta. I mean, but how do you in this period of time? I mean, how do you even limit the span of your research? You needed to be able to describe what food people were eating at that time, how they were consuming it, the music, the radio that was, the radio programs, the little details like that. It was just why it took 10 years.
Laksmi, can you tell us, why did you decide to make 1965 so central to your story? This takes some courage. You started 10 years ago, you say. It was not very normal to talk about 1965.
I don't know.
Coincidentally, there are now a few novelists, Eka Kunyawan, Leila Chudori,
But I
who
beg to
take
differ, though.
1965.
I beg to differ, though, because well, okay, so we burst onto the scene very recently. Leila Chudori's novel, as well as mine, came out in 2012. Eka's was probably in 2000. I mean, I think his first novel that got translated into English was published in 2005. Sorry. So it's a decade old. But it's not true that we were the first, because when in 1998, when Suharto administration found its, was in its demise. The floodgates of to the freedom of expression was opened. And then suddenly we had a new breed of writers and intellectuals and artists and also academics who were coming up with alternative or revisionist histories. And there was a new thirst for alternative readings on 1965. Suddenly major bookstores, I mean, I at the time was knee-deep in a bookstore, and we were stocking classic works of the left as well as any revisionist history there was. Publishing houses were hungry for new works on 1965. And novelists, I mean, Ahmad Tohari, Ayu Utami, at the time, they were already, I mean, Tuti Herati, they were writing about 1965. Bre Redana, writing under the pseudonym of Gitanjali, came up with two books that were overtly about 1965. One was called Blues Merbabu, and the other was called 1965, because he's the son. So that leaves
open the question: Why did you choose 1965 as your?
Well, because I belong to a generation that was born in late 1971. I went through school in the 70s and 80s being taught a very one-sided version of history.
Did you have to watch
and I had to, I mean, I was
movie,
the
Gerakan 30.
I belong to that very unfortunate generation who had to go, through our school days dreading the 30th of September every year, because we were sat down and we had to watch almost like under the pain of torture, if we didn't do it because it was compulsory. This highly propagandistic official film on 1965, which just showed how bad all communists were, and they were the enemy of the Indonesian state, and therefore they deserved to be exterminated. So this was just part of this systematic and obsessive conditioning of the perils of communism that was just drummed into our psyche for God knows how long. So I remember feeling, why is there no other interpretation? Why is there no room for other interpretation? Now, I was very lucky to have grown up in a very politically minded, liberal, progressive family. I mean, our dinner.
But not the leftists. Not the leftists.
But not leftists. But they're but they have a solid understanding of how history should be taught, and that it needs to be questioned all the time. So our dinner conversations were invariably, filled with politics. They never talk about 1965, but they said, go study history, which is telling in itself. So I thought, why not write about 1965? And then, of course, I went to Murdoch University, which is one of the institutions par excellence for Asian studies, and there I came across dedicated and very sort of passionate and committed Indonesianists who are very, very concerned about interpretation of 1965, and there was a wealth of materials in their library that we had no access to in Indonesia. So it kind of it had an arc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Hilde, what about you? Were you surprised that 1965 would make up such a big story in your book?
Yeah, in the beginning, yes. Or in the beginning I was not that much aware of. I knew the story of 1965 and how it had touched upon Minnie's life, what it did, the impact it had. But I only, while talking to her and to others, realized that it was a kind of, also turning point. On the one hand, it was very, very traumatic, because that was the reason why Minnie actually, she was the most reluctant looking back at history and talking about history. And she always told me, Why do you want to know all these things? What is so interesting about the past? I'm not used to look at the past. I will look forward. And I discussed it with her children also. Why is she so reluctant? Is it the pain? Is it because she forgets things? And I keep asking about details, which is very frustrating. But then I realized that also the children are really traumatized about it. And they, one son didn't want to talk about it. He said, it's too painful for me. And he even, till now, tells his children, if they ask, where is Opa in this picture? And then he says, no, you remember Opa was in Hawaii at those days. So they had a kind of family joke because they felt it was too painful to always say that, well, that was the time when you were in prison. So they said that was the time when you were in Hawaii. So it became a running gag in the family, but also a very painful running gag, which is still used by one of the sons to explain the absence of their father. So I think then I realized it was very traumatic, and on the other hand, it was also kind of, they grew apart, politics divided the friends, but still they remained friends, because, and then it was, I saw it also as an opportunity to show that, like I wanted to do with the freedom struggle, that it's not black and white, this history. It's all kinds of shades of gray, because Dolly was still supporting them, because she felt they had no right to imprison Nanang, who she really felt he was not a communist, he was a very good and gentle man, and it was wrong of the regime to do so. But on the other hand, she was part of this new order family, which she could not untie herself or set herself apart from. But you know, they knew one story. So as a human being, they felt for one another, and she realized suffering, and she supported, or her husband also supported, the secretary who was who had the book launch about, and she was also imprisoned because she was the supposed palace singer of Sukarno, and she was also imprisoned as a young girl for I don't know how many years. So in that sense, you could see that they were still friends, they felt for each other, and despite the fact that there was this immense political divide, and I think this political divide is also, you can see it everywhere in Indonesia. I mean, 65 has divided families, because one brother is on this side, the other brother is on that side. So, and they all have to find ways to live with it, or behave friendly towards each other, or just...
But you can still see this, I mean, you know, in the reactions in Indonesia, or response to the 50th anniversary of 1965, which is like only, what, less than a week ago. The amount of bile and the amount of the way that you just realize that it's still a very polarizing and a very divisive subject in a society. I mean, it sort of came to a fore. You know, suddenly, you know, you heard people, anti-communists, sort of talking about how the left were persecuting the right. Which of course they were when the Indonesian Communist Party was still very powerful. And how they were exterminating their families, and how they were making them suffer, and that 1965 was really about a national crisis in which the option was to kill or to be killed, but the amount of just the venom It's staggering. I mean, 50 years on. But on the other hand, you know, you have a survey in 2009, and I love regurgitating this one survey, but it's very telling because in 2009 there was a survey that was conducted in Jakarta universities, and more than half of the respondents who came from elite Jakarta universities had not even heard of 1965, let alone have some kind of interpretation, you know, of it. So what was being taught in schools, for instance? So I mean, we're not talking about just historical amnesia. We're talking about historical, you know, complete, you know, ignorance, right? So
denial and ignorance.
Denial and ignorance, and so really we. And I'm very, very happy, and I have to bring this up, that the International People's Tribunal is coming up in November. Across the exactly, and I mean, it is no mean feat, because I think with Joko Widodo's, our president's recent categorical refusal to apologize to the victims of 1965 after his promised to look into unresolved past cases of human rights violations in Indonesia. It is, you know, the job really does fall on the shoulders of civil society as usual. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't have high hopes for what they could achieve. They're going to be limited. Because it is, you know, the tribunal does not seek to...
What should they achieve? What should be the aim of these actions of this tribunal?
Address impunity?
No, because the thing is, of course, it's not going to drag alleged perpetrators to court. It's not trying to seek legal punitive measures for the alleged perpetrators, but it's supposed to be a morally charged, you know, inquiry into collecting findings that would aid future policy making on the government's part, which is, of course, it sounds very, very normative, but you have to start somewhere. And the fact that it's, you know, that it's still going on in the face of so much opposition from factions of the government with prevailing links to the Suharto regime, I think it's a daring, courageous thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the organizers. How much time do we have left? It's do I see 10 minutes?
Oh,
10 minutes.
Then we have questions.
Okay, then we come to to closure of the 1965 issue, I hope, but to our interview. Maybe we can end with Laksmi reading a few fragments from the last part of her novel. We're back in Buru.
Yeah.
In 2006, I think Amba is looking for Bisma, for his body.
Okay, just a very brief explanation of this chapter. It comprises all the letters that Bisma, as a political prisoner, wrote to his beloved, to Amba. These letters were then stuffed into bamboo tubes, and then they were buried at the base of a Meranti tree in the hope that somebody would unearth it one day and give it to Amba, and somebody did. Somebody trusted. Anyway, so I'm reading
Not that long.
5 minutes worth of 5 minutes worth of letters. Okay. So, okay. 23rd of December, 1973. My love, the strangest thing today. Someone's lifeless body was dredged from the swamp near Unit 15, Indrapura. I was there, watching, when suddenly I heard strains of Umma Saleh in the background. A friend told me later it was an interpretation of the Al-Araf, chapter 7 of the Quran. It is not the first time I've heard this song sung since I arrived in Buru. And although it won't do to appear touched by such things, it nearly destroys me each time I hear it. These days I'm easily moved by a tree, a bird, by watching the river. Things we know as lovely become magnified, almost godly, as you come close to them. Now, it feels melodramatic writing this, but it's true. You know, I've never been religious. I even used to make a point about not being religious, to avoid being thought of that way by my peers. But I've discovered that learning to rest in solitude is in itself a religious experience. April 1974. It has dawned upon me, darling, what waiting means. When we talk about waiting, really waiting, we do not talk about hours, days, even months. It's about knowing how to be patient, about reaching a point such as when you pick up a pen and a sheet of paper, see the first smile of a recovering patient, or meet a visitor who tells you, it's still better to have a home than no home at all. Only then you know that you can wait. There is a man from Banten I visit from time to time, usually on my way to the farthest units. His name is Rukmanda, and he believes I have special powers. When he first tried to tell me this, I dismissed the idea immediately. I said, I don't want to hear it. I bet you think it's something about my name being Bisma. If it is, I already know. I don't need a sage from Black Magic Land to tell me that I will only die when I choose to. I didn't add that I've always known that your face, my love, will be the last image I will see before drawing my last breath. Okay, a bit sentimental. But gradually I've come to wonder if that man Rukmanda could be right. In this place of impatience, there have been too many moments in which tempers inflame and someone is beaten senseless for the error of another. And this can easily make us bitter towards one another. I have experienced such beatings, yet it's taken me a long time to realize that when it happens, I don't feel any physical pain. I don't feel it during interrogation either, which is really another word for torture. I read somewhere once that intense physical pain mimes death. Each time intense pain is inflicted upon the body, it is a kind of mock execution. I try to conjure in my mind the tonal sensation of pain, if there is indeed such a thing, but I simply can't. I see what pain does to my body, the gashes, the swelling and inflammation, the festering pus. I can see what inflicting pain is about, the power game, the naked show of brute force. But I cannot summon the sensation of pain, even if only to confirm that I am mortal. This has been an idle hour, and I have acquired it through sly machinations. Now it is dark. My love, I have to take leave of you once more. What I'd give to be able to hold you again in my arms. And the final one. My love, today I saw strange markings around the spot when I've been burying these notes, but I didn't dare check, much less risk raking them up. So I left them there. I will find another tree. It is not easy to leave a tree. It may not have seen all of a person's landscape, but it has seen most of what's done to him and holds his breath, provided it escapes the greed of man and remains unscathed until the moment the man's children see those very things he'd seen. Final one, 1977-78. This is just before the prison camp was dismantled. My beloved, men are going home. There is something to watching the back of a ship sail off towards that elusive line in the farthest distance, a line that for years has seemed to me to be your mouth. There is a lovely finality to this, men who have been imprisoned here for years, separated from their families, their real lives, now, at last, returning home. Some things still surprise. Years of imprisonment, including in Salemba and Nusa Kambangan, have taught me that in the worst predicaments, the most delicate things can survive. I saw this in the faces of those men sailing home. Even the seemingly meek ones, guys hardly seen or heard, the so-called little ones who seem to lack the will to survive, looking very much alive and well. How would it be for us, for you and me, had I been one of those men going back? Would I have the courage to seek you, beg you for a second chance? Yet I'm staying behind. Almost every night during the past few weeks, I've been wakened by the night itself. I've learned to love the rain. And for the past few months at the Mako Hospital, where I've bunked in one of the rooms, it has poured down the window panes, emptying me of thought and desire. The night rain has made seeing familiar faces depart somewhat easier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laksmi. I'm looking again at the organizers. Can we have a few questions? Yes? We have a short time for a few questions. Yes, please introduce yourself and let's try to be a bit short. It's not...
Okay, thank you so much, Remco. I'm Saskia Wieringa. I'm the organizer of the tribunal that you were talking about, Laksmi. Thank you so much for
Hi, Saskia.
What I would like to reflect on is, it's also in your book a little bit, is the whole ideology of kill or be killed. That is actually a new order construction. Mm-hmm. The Communist Party was not in any way busy killing at that moment. Yeah. In fact, if there were any people being killed in 64 and 65, it were the communists already. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this whole idea that we have to kill the communists, otherwise they will kill us, that's a new order construction. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. No, I agree. Completely.
Thank you. Somebody else. I'm at the back.
Hi, Boudewijn van Eert. I'm a student here in The Hague, and it's not directly related to what we've been talking about, but what we have been touching upon is how political a shared memory can be, how political history can be. And in the case of the Netherlands in dealing with Indonesia, what I've noticed in my own education, especially in high school, is that it is completely put away what the Dutch have done, actually, in Indonesia as well. And I feel like that in my own education, it's really been lacking to explain the severity of what has been done there as well. And like, how are modern day Indonesians experiencing this? Is that, are they looking for a similar tribunal or for justification, or for, is there anything being done or felt?
Is that
well, anyone on the stage who could tell me the answer.
Okay. Well, I think if you look at the official response from the embassy personnel here in The Hague, the Indonesian embassy, and also in Indonesia itself, it is that let the past be the past. We are over it. Why aren't you? Talking to the Dutch and saying, why are you always again opening this old wound and wanting to delve into what has happened in the past? So for them, it's, and I think many people who I came across always would joke to me saying that, well, there's a lot of blood between us, 350 years of history, and they would laugh about it and say, but that's all over now. So on the one hand, I think that they have the feeling that we have won. So just like I think many of the 65 Suharto regime thinks we have won. So why talk about it? We move on. So I think it's not something, I mean, for individual persons who really suffered, like the people of Rawagede who lost their husbands, their fathers, that is something different. But in general, I think not that it's something that they really, they suffered other things afterwards.
I don't know, I sometimes think that, our this ingrained culture of impunity in our society, in Indonesian society, has probably something to do with the way history is taught. And much of it has to do with how 1965 was taught. There's just no, historical sort of consciousness as to the fact that you really do have to be introspective about the past, and confront the past. I mean, let alone confront the past, but just to be sensitive to it. And I don't know. I don't really have too much of insight of why we are so reluctant to look at the past, to learn about the future.
Yeah. Yeah. But the question
was about the present.
The question was about the Dutch part, and there's a story of impunity in Holland as well. So there's Indonesia is not exceptional in that sense. Yeah. Maybe in dimensions, but not otherwise. There was somebody at the back.
Yes, I just want to thank you for beautiful writings, beautiful books, but I would like to respond to that, to add to what you said. I think as an Indonesian, I would say that, yes, there has been a culture of impunity, and 1965, I wouldn't take that apart from the culture of impunity that was also rooted in the colonial past. And I think the Dutch colonial past was one of the painful history that taught us about impunity. I beg to differ, though. I don't think that everybody accept. In general, people don't really accept that. But yes, publicly you are forced to accept that. I've been told one time in a discussion that, that's past, forget about it, move on. But I think personally there are a lot of people, either in writings, fictions, or other kind of writings, or also research, are here in the Netherlands in order to pursue that, what you just said about. Thank you.
Yes, I'm not saying that there's no exceptions to the rule, and that gives you hope, right? Yeah.
Maybe one last, Ethan, if I. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ethan Mark. I'm also a colleague of Remco, a historian also of Japan and Southeast Asia, Indonesia. Thank you very much. This is really wonderful. I'm so glad I came. I live kind of far away, so I was debating the whole day whether I should. It was really, really fantastic. I had a question. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask, but I'll limit it to one, which is a question that I have also myself as a historian. I think Remco has is what about the bigger, the global picture? The fact that what happened in 1965 was very much a Cold War event, and an event that, in that sense, where foreign powers and foreign interests were very much intimately involved. You can't really disentangle the United States. I don't know about the Netherlands specifically, but the United States, Japan, which I work on, also there were huge interests that shaped what happened, and I think for everyone who writes about that period, this is a challenge to incorporate that. I wonder if either of you had wrestled with that and thought about how to do that, or maybe ended up not doing it.
For my own purposes in writing the novel, my emphasis was purposefully on trying to find the sorts of transcendence, that my characters can, or my characters through their encounters with others could find in dealing with pain. So I was not very much into sort of the details of the details of what happened, really, and sort of to judge. And discuss the masterminds of the 30th September movement, for instance, and of the whole purge. But it was just about the sort of the more human dimensions of the tragedy. Was forgiveness possible? How did people deal with defeat, with incomprehensions, with loss, with destruction, with humiliation, whether or not it was possible for the oppressed and the oppressor to have a meeting point. So these were the questions that occupied me. And so I was not really sort of looking, I was not really paying attention to the CIA involvement, for instance, and and all the sort of the more sort of external factors that that came into play. I don't know about your.
Yeah, for me it's actually more or less the same. That it was more about
the human
impact,
story.
because for my protagonists, they actually it just happened. Although they could foresee or could feel that there was a build-up of tensions, political tensions, and even some of them were aware what was happening in the world and how other countries were kind of looking into Indonesia, and there was a whole geopolitical situation. I think that for them it was still, all of a sudden, something came over them, and I think that's why I focused on the fact that what happened afterwards, and because it's still some things we don't know exactly what exactly happened and who was involved. But I know that because when I was still in Indonesia at the beginning of 2011, at the Goethe Institute, they had invited a whole group of scholars who talked about, from the Chinese side, from the European side, the Australian side, what was their involvement in the whole coup, to put it in an international context.
I think, in some ways, I think we all have our works divided. The historians have, and the historians have their lot to do. The novelists have their lot to do,
and it's very complicated to bring.
And we all kind of try to complement each other.
Here I tend to disagree a little bit.
No, really?
I'll explain in 2 sentences, but I'm afraid we have to keep it at this.
What were your 2 sentences?
And the 2 sentences are coming up now. Because as a historian, I read the life stories of these fabulous women. I read your novel about this strangely mercurial woman. And both acted as a kind of curtain raisers and as a basis for further discussion. So I would say thank you both for coming here. It was wonderful to have you. We have tons of questions, but I would say first read and then talk. There is a signing session somewhere around, so you can exchange 2 words with the authors, and they put their signature in the book, and you can buy the books by then. Follow the series of Writers Unlimited, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.